36 hours ago, Israel crossed a line that every government on Earth agreed would never be crossed. At 1:53 a.m. local time on March 25, 2026, 8 F-35I Adir stealth fighters from the Israeli Air Force's 140th Golden Eagle Squadron completed a 1,600-kilometer strike mission and turned west toward home. Behind them, on Iran's southwestern coast, the Bushehr nuclear power plant, that became the only operational civilian nuclear reactor in the Middle East, was on fire. Not damaged, not partially struck, on fire. Two GBU-28 bunker-buster bombs, each weighing 2,268 kilograms, had penetrated the secondary containment structure of Reactor Unit 1. The cooling system failed within 4 minutes of impact. Fuel rod exposure began 11 minutes later. By the time Iranian emergency crews reached the site, the reactor building's internal temperature had exceeded 200 degrees Celsius and rising. The International Atomic Energy Agency's Emergency Monitoring Network detected the first radiation release at 2:41 a.m. By dawn, the plume was moving north-northwest at 35 kilometers per hour, carried by prevailing winds toward Avaz, a city of 1.3 million people. And beyond that, toward the Iraqi border. Israel did not strike a weapons facility. Israel did not strike a military installation. Israel struck a civilian nuclear power plant that was under IAEA safeguards, generating electricity for Iranian cities, and whose reactor core contained enough radioactive material to contaminate an area the size of Belgium if it fully melted down. The world has not seen anything like this since Chernobyl in 1986, and the geopolitical consequences will outlast the radiation. To understand why Israel made this decision, and why it may be the most consequential military strike since Hiroshima, you need to understand what Bushehr represented, not just to Iran, but to every country watching what happens next. Bushehr nuclear power plant was built by Russia. That sentence contains everything you need to know about why the next 72 hours are the most dangerous since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Construction began in 1975 under the Shah. After the Islamic Revolution, the project stalled for 2 decades. Russia's Rosatom State Nuclear Corporation stepped in during the 1990s, completing the reactor and bringing it online in 2011. Russia supplied the uranium fuel. Russia trained the Iranian operators. Russia maintained a continuous technical presence at the facility. Approximately 200 Russian nuclear engineers and technicians were on site at any given time, rotating on 6-month contracts. At 1:53 a.m. on March 25th, some of those Russian technicians were in the reactor building. The Israeli government has not commented on Russian casualties. The Russian government has not released a number. But the silence from Moscow is louder than any statement, because Russia does not go quiet when its citizens are killed by a Western-aligned military power. Russia goes quiet when it is deciding what to do about it. That decision is being made right now. Let me tell you exactly what Israel struck and why the targeting choice matters. Because this was not a mistake, and it was not collateral damage. It was a deliberate selection from a list of options, and understanding why Israel chose Bushehr tells you everything about where this war is going. Israel has been striking Iranian military targets for 4 weeks. It has hit missile production facilities, drone manufacturing plants, IRGC command headquarters, air defense radar installations. Each strike degraded Iranian military capability. None of them stopped the missiles falling on Tel Aviv. The logic of Bushehr is different. Israel was not trying to degrade a military capability. It was trying to impose a cost so large, so visceral, so impossible to absorb quietly, that Iran's calculus about continuing the war would change overnight. The calculation is this: Iran can absorb the loss of a missile factory. It can rebuild a radar installation. It can replace IRGC commanders. What it cannot do, what no government can do, is uncontaminate a coastline, unexpose a population to radiation, undestroy the symbol of national technological achievement that Bushehr represented to Iranian national identity. Bushehr was not just a power plant. It was proof that Iran belonged in the community of nations with civilian nuclear capability. Striking it was not just a military act. It was an act of civilizational humiliation, and that humiliation has a radiation cloud attached to it. Let me give you the numbers on what is actually burning. Reactor Unit 1 at Bushehr contained approximately 82 metric tons of low-enriched uranium fuel at the time of the strike. Under normal operating conditions, a reactor accumulates fission products, radioactive isotopes created by the splitting of uranium atoms, throughout its fuel cycle. Bushehr had been operating continuously for approximately 14 months since its last refueling outage. 14 months of fission product accumulation. The most dangerous of these isotopes in the immediate term is cesium-137, with a half-life of 30 years. In a Chernobyl scales release, cesium-137 contaminated 150,000 square kilometers of Europe to levels requiring agricultural restrictions. Bushehr's reactor is smaller than Chernobyl's, approximately 40% of Chernobyl's thermal output. But it is operating at the edge of the Persian Gulf, in a region with prevailing winds that shift seasonally, surrounded by some of the most densely populated oil infrastructure on the planet. The Gulf itself, 989 kilometers long, 338 kilometers wide at its broadest, and an average of just 50 meters deep, is one of the most environmentally sensitive bodies of water on Earth. It takes approximately 200 years for the Gulf's water to completely exchange with the open ocean. Radioactive contamination entering the Gulf does not flush out in weeks or months. It circulates. It bioaccumulates in fish, in shrimp, in the marine food chains that feed 35 million people across 8 countries. The IAEA's preliminary assessment, shared with member states but not yet publicly released, estimates that if the reactor achieves full core meltdown, the contamination zone for agricultural restrictions will encompass approximately 35,000 square kilometers of Iranian territory, including the city of Bushehr, with a population of 240,000, and will render significant portions of the northern Gulf Coast unsafe for fishing for a minimum of 15 to 20 years. 15 to 20 years. Iran's fishing industry employs approximately 120,000 people. The Gulf Coast's desalination plants, which provide drinking water for millions of Iranians, draw from waters that may now be contaminated. Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE all operate Gulf desalination infrastructure. They are all watching the radiation monitoring data with the specific terror of people who drink water from the source that is now downstream of a burning reactor. If you understand why this is not just a Middle East story, but a global crisis, subscribe right now, because the mainstream coverage is showing you satellite images of the burning reactor building. It is not doing the math on what 82 metric tons of irradiated fuel means for the Persian Gulf ecosystem over the next 2 decades. Let me tell you what every major power is doing right now, because the diplomatic emergency unfolding in the next 72 hours will determine whether this war stays regional or becomes something else entirely. Russia summoned the Israeli ambassador to Moscow within 4 hours of the strike. The Foreign Ministry statement used language that Russian diplomats reserve for situations they consider existential. A barbaric act of nuclear terrorism. A direct attack on Russian state assets and Russian citizens, consequences that will be commensurate with the gravity of what has occurred. Russia has 200 technicians at Bushehr. Russia built the reactor. Russia supplied the fuel. Under the legal framework of the Russia-Iran Nuclear Cooperation Agreement, Russia retains partial ownership of the facility and the fuel inside it. Israel just destroyed Russian state property and may have killed Russian citizens. In any other context, in any previous decade, that would constitute an act of war against Russia. China called an emergency session of the UN Security Council within 6 hours. Beijing's ambassador tabled a resolution condemning the strike and demanding an immediate ceasefire. The United States vetoed it. The vote was 13-1 with 1 abstention. The isolation of that single veto, the United States alone against every other Security Council member, was itself a message that will reverberate for years. The IAEA Director General issued a statement calling the strike an unprecedented attack on civilian nuclear infrastructure and invoking Article 20 of the IAEA statute, a provision that has never been invoked in the agency's 68-year history. Iran's supreme leader addressed the nation at noon local time. He did not announce specific retaliatory measures. He announced something more dangerous. He suspended all of Iran's commitments under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, withdrew from the additional protocol inspection regime, and ordered the acceleration of Iran's nuclear weapons program to whatever speed physics allows. That last phrase. Whatever speed physics allows. Iran has been assessed by Western intelligence agencies as being approximately 3 to 4 weeks from weapons-grade uranium enrichment capability if it chose to break out of all restraints. The supreme leader just removed all restraints. Now let me tell you what the official Israeli position is, and where it collides with every other reality in this situation. The Israeli government described the strike as a legitimate act of self-defense targeting a facility that Iran was using to advance its nuclear weapons program under civilian cover. The Prime Minister's office released intelligence claiming that Bushehr's reactor building was being used to store centrifuge components destined for underground enrichment facilities. Here is what that justification does not resolve. Even if the intelligence is accurate, even if centrifuge components were stored at Bushehr, the reactor itself was under continuous IAEA monitoring. IAEA inspectors visited the site 12 days before the strike. Their report found no evidence of weapons program activity in the reactor building. Striking a safeguarded civilian facility based on intelligence that contradicts the most recent inspection findings is not self-defense under any established interpretation of international law. It is a precedent, and precedents in nuclear law are permanent. If Israel can strike a safeguarded civilian reactor and call it self-defense, then every country with a grievance against a nuclear-capable neighbor now has a legal framework, however disputed, for doing the same. India and Pakistan both have civilian reactors near their shared border. North Korea has justified preemptive action against South Korean infrastructure for decades. The restraint that has kept civilian nuclear facilities off the target list since the dawn of the nuclear age just ended. Here are the 3 scenarios that determine what the next 30 days look like. None of them are good. Scenario 1. The reactor achieves full containment before full meltdown. Iranian emergency crews, supported by whatever international assistance can be organized, stabilize the reactor core. Radiation release is significant but not Chernobyl scale. The Gulf is damaged but not catastrophically. Even in this best case, Iran's NPT withdrawal stands. The nuclear weapons breakout timeline collapses from years to weeks. Russia's relationship with the United States and Israel is permanently altered. The precedent of striking safeguarded civilian nuclear infrastructure is established and cannot be unestablished. And Iran has a justification for nuclear weapons development that the entire world, including American allies, finds difficult to argue against. Scenario 2. Full core meltdown. The reactor achieves a condition similar to Fukushima Daiichi Unit 1. Sustained fuel damage, hydrogen generation, explosive dispersal of radioactive material beyond the containment structure. Contamination of the Persian Gulf at levels requiring long-term fishing bans. Desalination plants in Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE shut down as a precaution. Drinking water emergency across the Gulf region. 6 GCC countries facing simultaneous water and food security crises while a war is ongoing. In this scenario, the war becomes irrelevant compared to the humanitarian emergency. International pressure for an immediate ceasefire, including from American allies, becomes impossible to resist. Scenario 3. Russia responds. Not with direct military force against Israel. Russia does not have that force projection capability. But Russia has options that do not require firing a single shot. Advanced S-500 air defense systems delivered to Iran within 72 hours. Real-time targeting intelligence that allows Iran to track Israeli F-35s more effectively. Russian naval assets repositioned in the eastern Mediterranean that change the calculus for American carrier strike groups operating in support of Israel. Russia does not need to enter the war to change the war. It needs only to decide that protecting what remains of its investment in Iran's nuclear infrastructure is worth the cost of direct involvement. And that decision is being made in Moscow right now. Here is what you need to understand as we close. Israel struck Bushehr because it was losing the attrition war. Missile stockpiles depleting, interceptor inventories shrinking, F-35 fleet reduced, economic costs compounding daily. The logic was, impose a cost so catastrophic that Iran cannot continue. What Israel may have achieved instead, giving Iran the justification it has sought for 40 years to openly pursue nuclear weapons, triggering a Russian involvement that rewrites the military equation, creating a humanitarian catastrophe that isolates Israel from every country except the United States, and contaminating the Persian Gulf for a generation. The radiation monitoring network shows the plume moving north. Avaz is measuring elevated cesium levels. The Iraqi border is next. The IAEA has activated its Incident and Emergency Center for the first time in its history. Every desalination plant manager on the Gulf Coast is on the phone with their government right now. 82 metric tons of irradiated fuel. A reactor core that may or may not be contained. A Russian government deciding what commensurate consequences means. An Iranian supreme leader who just suspended the NPT. And a Persian Gulf that 8 countries drink from. Share this video. Because the coverage will show you the burning reactor building and the Israeli government's justification and the Security Council vote. It will not tell you what 82 metric tons of fission products means for Gulf desalination infrastructure. It will not explain that Iran just suspended the NPT. It will not map what commensurate consequences looks like when the country's saying it has 6,000 nuclear warheads and a direct stake in what just burned. They will give you the version where this is a military story. I just gave you the version where this is a nuclear story. And nuclear stories do not have clean endings. The reactor is burning. The plume is moving. And the world just changed in ways that will take decades to measure.